Brent received a call from his old client. Could he come in and retune the piano? He could. A date and time were set, and Brent entered them into his meeting diary. On the appointed day, Brent walked up to the Williams house and rang the doorbell. To his surprise, it was not Mr. Williams who opened the door. Instead, an attractive young blonde stood there. Brent appreciated a beautifully defined female form as much as the next man, and he had to admit that this was one very beautiful female form. She was dressed casually in a loose-necked blouse and a miniskirt. Judging by the way her blouse hugged her chest, Brent could have sworn she wasn't wearing a bra. "Good morning," he said. "I'm Brent Masters. I have an appointment to tune a piano." "Oh, yes," the blonde blurted out. "Popsy said that someone would come to him to do this. He wanted to be here himself to see you, but he had to leave. I'm Mrs. Williams, but you can call me Carly." Carly turned and headed into the house, followed by a slightly puzzled Brent. He couldn't help but notice how lovingly her skirt fitted, and if she was wearing panties, they certainly didn't leave any visible marks on the material. Now that he thought about it, he remembered that Mr. Williams had married again. Given that Mr. Williams was in his 50s and Carly was hardly in her 20s, Brent suspected that she was a trophy wife. With that face and figure, she was probably an experienced gold digger, too. Sitting down at the piano, Brent ran his hand over the keys, listening to the sounds. Not bad, he thought. There are a few rough edges, but overall everything is pretty good. Brent assumed that Carly would leave him to continue her work. He should have been disappointed. He was reaching for some tuning forks when she spoke to him. "How do you know that the sounds are wrong?" As Brent turned to answer, he saw Carly leaning over the piano. His idle thoughts about her lack of a bra were answered on the spot. The loose neckline of the blouse gaped. Carly's bra-less jewelry was on full display. Brent took a deep breath and kept his eyes on Carly's face. After all, she was a customer. I compare the sound each note makes with my tuning forks if I'm not sure. I can usually tell by simply pressing a key. I have very acute hearing, but I really need silence while I'm doing the testing." "Certainly. You go straight ahead." "I just love watching an expert at work," Carly said. It wasn't what she said, Brent decided, but how she said it. "And there's nothing you can do about it or you'll end up looking like a fool." He took a deep breath and got to work. It was hell. Every time he wanted silence, Carly bombarded him with questions. She was constantly moving. She leaned over to look at his tools as her blouse fell open, showing off her assets. She leaned over the edge of the piano while her blouse was open and exposed her breasts. Standing on tiptoe and trying to look behind the piano, she somehow managed to unbutton her blouse and expose her femininity. The first time Brent was willing to concede may have been an accident. The same could happen with the second, and even the third. But there was no way the constant barrage of exposed breasts could be anything other than intentional. Carly was deliberately teasing him. Glancing briefly at her face in the mirror as she passed behind him, he saw the open mockery on her face. She had fun, arousing herself by showing her tits to a guy, knowing that he couldn't do anything about it. By the time Brent finished, her constant chatter and general distraction had nearly doubled the length of the visit. When he wrote the invoice, Brent was somewhat reluctant to charge Mr. Williams for a full day's work, since he had to complete half that time. Considering Carly's behavior, Brent thought that was fair enough. He was tempted to add a premium for dangerous work. Taking the bill from him, Carly looked at him. If you wait a minute, I'll write you a check," she said and ran out of the room, returning a minute later with a checkbook in her hand. She walked to the middle of the room and leaned over the coffee table to write out a check. Brent noted that it was a very low coffee table. Most people who would use it for recording would either be sitting or crouching rather than just bending over. They especially wouldn't turn their back to the man in the room and lean that far while wearing a miniskirt. Plus a flirty skirt. Of course, if they wanted to show you what was under your skirt, they could just do that. If Carly wanted to play games, then he would play games too. In the end, his work was finished. He casually moved closer to Carly and extended his hand down. Carly squealed and bolted upright, fighting his hand away. "Are you crazy?" she demanded. "What do you think you're doing?" Watching Carly try to adjust her clothes, Brent smiled. "If I were you, I wouldn't bother myself with this." Carly winced at this. "I wonder if she's gone too far." That was it, she realized when she saw Brent unzip his fly. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked again, staring at Brent, looking down and back to his face. "I intend to do it," Brent said. "Just where you want it, and don't say you don't know this." Carly looked at Brent a little nervously. He couldn't be serious, could he? He was a simple worker. She was the wife of a rich man. She couldn't afford to have sex with him. Brent reached under Carly's blouse and cupped her breast. "You've been showing me this for the last 2 hours," he stated. "Now it's time to act." Carly bit her lip but felt excitement wash over her. Brent was serious. He was going to use her, as if she were anyone. She lifted her skirt. Brent nodded with satisfaction. Taking Carly's blouse, he lifted it, and Carly automatically raised her hands to take it off. He was merciless, enjoying her reaction and pleading cries. He wasn't sure if she was begging him to stop or continue. Carly didn't know what she was begging for either. All she knew was that Brent was taking her, using her, regardless of her reaction. And at the same time, he drove her crazy. She heard herself screaming and pleading. She felt herself squirming under his control and knew she had to continue. Finally, having pulled herself together, Carly sat down. Brent was still there, standing and waiting. She looked at him. "You didn't sign this?" he said. Carly felt empty and looked where he pointed. Her checkbook was there. She hadn't even finished writing the check when things started to go wrong. Reaching out, she took the pen and signed. Brent took the check, nodded to her, and left. As Brent walked to his car, Mr. Williams pulled up. When he stopped, he jumped out of his car and walked over to greet Brent, shaking his hand. "Sorry I wasn't here to greet you," he said. "Work obligations. I'm guessing Carly pointed you to the piano." "You're guessing, right?" Brent said. "In fact, she came with me and stayed while I set it up. She had several questions regarding the job." Brent saw Mr. Williams go over this in his head and was surprised to see the man give him an appraising look and turn slightly pale. "Oh, Brent," said Mr. Williams, "please tell me you were smart enough to use it. You did it, didn't you?" Seeing the agreement on Brent's face, Mr. Williams breathed a sigh of relief. "Thank God for that," he muttered. "It would probably kill me if you walked away and left her in an agitated state. I would have to try to satisfy her, and I can't do that as often as I used to. Well, have a nice day. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one."